Today is day 6 of the December 89 7-day retreat at Springwater. There are a number of questions left, and there probably won't be time to go into them all. And there may be questions I've forgot to put down. And not knowing right now which one to start with, I'll do what we did the last 2 retreats, is sort of read through them all. People have mentioned to me that they have found that very helpful or interesting. In hearing the shots around the question comes up, is another deer being killed? Somehow it is quite clear to me that there is no method in this work. Method to come to awareness, and yet I find myself constantly looking for a technique. From you or from others. Wanting a technique. Some harsh memories came up and a lot of guilt. What is guilt? Is it at all possible to live in our everyday life out of a sustained awareness? Is there any choice? Do we have any choice in going with thoughts that go through the mind, or not going with them? This has come up with quite a number of people. That so much of the time there is within me a feeling of being bad, of having done something wrong, of being no good. What is that feeling of being bad? I want everyone to love me. And I do love many people. What is love? Do you really have so much opposition as it sounds from some of the questions you bring up? could there be some communal ritual here? Not that I want to introduce it, the person said, but there is a lack here of something done communally. Eating together. Some expression of gratitude. Or some expression at the sadness one felt when hearing about the deer being shot at the pond. That involves people together, participating in something together. I've been wondering whether I'm so concerned about helping others, which includes helping people in my therapeutic practice, whether I'm so concerned with helping people because I myself feel so helpless, so powerless, and often so utterly inadequate, a failure. Is there something that has no beginning and no end? That was another question. How will one find the answer to all of these questions? Who is asking them of whom? And is it even a matter of finding answers? A question comes up, and alone or together with interested people, one or more than one, can one sit down together and go into a question which moves one deeply? And very likely not just oneself, because the questions we ask are usually very common questions. Scratch the surface and we're all so much alike underneath the top veneer. These two questions come to mind, or the three, about what is guilt. A memory comes up and there's guilt about having done wrong, about being bad, a feeling of being bad, or feelings of great inadequacy, feeling a failure, and maybe out of that, the need to help others, to feel more adequate, and yet all the time the fear of failing, not doing good, not being able to help others. And in the case of this particular person, the question of, are there some communal things we can do? The person said, I remember in the past there would be chanting services directed toward disasters, to, through the chanting, help people suffering greatly in a disaster. Or world prayer, common communal prayer, directed toward the suffering. We have talked twice in this retreat about this deep urge feeling in us to help the suffering world and to question our feeling separate from the world, whether there is in fact this separation that urges us as individuals or groups to do something for this world as something separate from us. We've gone into that. And out of maybe that came the question again. Maybe it is my own feelings of inadequacy, helplessness and powerlessness, the person said, that makes me want to help, to feel more powerful, less helpless. Is that it? Can one go into that? If we disregard the superficial mind with its ideas of what we could do, how we could be of worth to others, and question within where these urges come from, then one does come, doesn't one, upon feelings of inadequacy, helplessness, powerlessness. And of course one can go into the past to find the origin of these feelings, which are the same for all human beings. We are born almost totally helpless and powerless, except for the ability to scream. To scream and to suck. To squirm around a bit. Agitation. Baby, when it gets hungry, begins to move around. Before screaming, it becomes agitated. Hands and arms and legs and feet moving. And then screaming. Crying, you can say. I don't want to prejudice through the word. There's something about a baby's scream or cry that is almost universally touching. It's the hardest thing to hear without doing something about it. Or without, if one is not able to do something about it. Maybe doesn't want to feed. The diaper is being changed, carried around, and is still screaming. Can't say what it needs. Maybe it doesn't know. It's helpless. Something is not right. And whatever is done for it, him or her, doesn't hit the mark. But very often there's no time for someone to pick up the baby. Or, when of the older generation that I am, how I was told as a baby, after being fed, nursed, and diapered, I was put on the balcony in the fresh air, and it was good for the baby to scream. It was healthy for its lungs. I heard that. I was told that when I grew up. It's good for babies to scream, cry. And when we were about to adopt a baby, all my well-meaning friends who had 2 or 3 children told me, don't spoil the baby. Don't pick it up too much. That was, at that time, in the 50s. And I read Dr. Spock books. These were the books that were available. I had, of course, studied psychology. Knew a lot about raising children. There were warnings in there about picking the baby up too much, spoiling it. Then it will never want to be alone. And very often, against my better feelings, I did not pick up the baby, had it in a little crib. It usually didn't last very long. But as soon as relatives or friends were there, there would be the admonition, you're spoiling this baby. And even past babyhood, toddlerhood, and little childhood, there is such helplessness on the part of the child in the presence of the adults, the giants I always call them, who can pretty much do with the child what they want to. Pick it up, leave it, put it in the room. It becomes too much of a pest, misbehaving, naughty, tantrum. In some ways we can and do treat children worse than we treat adults. Constantly blaming or criticizing when we feel there's something that's been done wrong. And little children just walk into it all the time. They don't know any better. And most of the things in our sophisticated households, which are not igloos or empty teepees or a warm tropical setting of so-called primitive people. Most of the things in our sophisticated households are no-nos. You can't touch them. You could get hurt, you may spoil something, wreck something. Break the springs of the furniture, scratch it or spill things on the new rug, milk on the new rug. One person told me, when I spilled a glass of milk, it was like doom. Badness. And the way we are trained ourselves, we're so incapable of talking factually with children about what is dangerous here or it's always in terms of anger or badness or goodness, just as we have been trained. We can't just calmly say, please don't do that. Of course, often parents complain, and I know that myself, if one says that a child may not react. But it's already conditioned to listen to where the borders are. When does it become too dangerous to continue? Dangerous in terms of the wrath that may come down upon one. Anger or ostracism in the room or being hit. So we don't learn as children very factually and objectively what is desirable to do, undangerous to do, and dangerous to do. But it's all connected with being good or bad. And connected with fear of punishment or expectation of reward. This is how we are raised, and this is how we raise our children at home and in school. So, things aren't learned directly, realistically, but in terms of me being good or bad. If I do something that is not according to what should be done in the household, in school. We talked about in one of the early retreats, didn't we? Early talks, that it arouses our anger to see somebody being stupid or acting stupidly or ignorantly. And feeling stupid becomes being bad because one has met so much wrath, anger, punishment with it. And the little children dish it out to each other in the same way. One can hear oneself if one listens to children talk to other children, or yell at them, correct them, or call them names. Actually quite amazing. One person once said to me, you're too idealistic about children. That's one thing I have against when you talk about children. You all make them out as little ideal beings, which they're not. They are little politicians from the very beginning. That's true. Children have a very, very subtle gauge for power. Parents' power and their parents' powerlessness, and then moving into that vacuum with a sprouting of their own power to pay back for past injuries or past humiliation, past defeat. And this is how the battle continues. I'm not saying that there can't be lovely moments between children and parents, that this is all like this, but there's a lot of this. And it manifests in us today when we feel, we don't know why, but we feel bad most of the time. Bad, no good, inadequate, helpless or powerless. I may leave things out, or so I'm not spouting truth here, but I'm looking at things as I see it, saw it in our own family, when I grew up, in the family that we had, when we had a child, how I observe it now with grandchildren, and with all the people that bring their children to your house, or you go to the house with children. One can observe a lot. And one person just said to me yesterday, watching in the supermarket, how children may be constantly browbeaten or beaten down, not necessarily physically, but with harsh words for their grabbing this or doing that, not being with a harried mother who comes home from work and needs to buy the food and cook it, and has these children who want to look around and investigate what's in the boxes, or insist on the cereal that was advertised on television. Because, see, television makes children feel good because The people who advertise their things direct themselves to the children. Tell your mom that this is good for you. They're on your side. They don't correct you or nag you. Speak to your whole being. Enjoy you, entertain you, treat you as equals. There's a lot of manipulation and market research in that, but it comes on like a friendly person there. And then if one asks mom to please get this or grab for it, she say, no, put that back. There's sugar in it. And sugar is bad for you. No one says that on TV. There's another thing. All the things that children hear are bad for you, the things that you ingest. What does that do to the brain, to the mind? One eats it anyways, but one knows one is doing this, which is bad. And for a while the parental prohibition is there, and taking care of that part that needs prohibition, one can eat that stuff because the parent prohibits it. It works that way. Somebody there to prohibit it, I can sneak it in and do it. But when the parents aren't there anymore, then there comes a conflict, because the parental voice is inside now. You're doing something bad, and one may do it anyways. And the guilt, maybe fear of being found out. All of this very vague. Because what I haven't touched upon is all the religious teaching of heaven and hell, which one may laugh off today, but it may sit deep down in every cell of the body. Fear of eternal damnation. Eternal burning. I remember I looked very carefully at some of these pictures, including reproductions of the marvelous paintings of the Sistine Chapel, of what happened during the flood, and what happens to those underneath the marvelous muscular figure of a condemning Christ or a judging Christ. Down below, I looked at every detail. Those roasted and dismembered in hell. Some of them wanting to climb out and being pulled back. This affects a child deeply. And surface layers maybe of later science study or so forth, which discards all this, may not touch the depth of this fear of damnation, of the fear of really being bad and getting retribution for it someday. It's not that clear, but it's there in the whole system. The damnation by God taking the place of damnation or judgment by the parent, fortifying that. And parents may use that to give themselves some support. But God too won't like this if he sees it or hears about it or finds out about it. So here we are in a retreat. And not ever any clearer than during a sitting comes this feeling of badness, guilt, a memory of recently doing something, hurting maybe somebody's feelings. But that harsh memory hooking into all the past fears, anxieties, feelings of badness. Or the badness we started with, the helplessness. It's all in the same thing, isn't it? How will one deal with that? There definitely is alleviation in doing something communal, a communal prayer or chanting, in which one can pour oneself to the point of self-forgetfulness, hoping or trusting this prayer will be heard, or the chanting will bring help to others from this place here, where there's such feelings of guilt about not doing enough, about not being good enough. I remember in my own early life a tremendous yearning for some communal type of ritual, which we didn't have at home at all. Not only were my parents scientists, but they were not. My mother, being Jewish, wanted to withhold all of that heritage from us, which she was afraid would hurt us, endanger us. So that was withheld. I had the feeling sometimes my grandmother wanted to talk about it, but my mother interfered. And the church in which I was eventually confirmed was a Lutheran church, and it was so bare. Right now, saying that, I can feel what somebody said here, this place is so bare. You know, in a Protestant church is nothing, if you've ever been in one. I like the Catholic churches, all the pictures and incense, and the surging structure upward. A lot of frescoes to look at and to shudder in the presence of. A roped off altar where you wondered what was behind those ropes or behind the altar, where somebody would appear and disappear too. But there was no ritual in my life. There was Christmas. I loved that. My parents really had nice Christmas celebration. By celebration means a marvelous tree, and of course gifts with a plate of sweets for each one, which nobody took away and said you're going to get it in small doses, you could eat all you wanted. And nobody said during that time, these are bad for you. A moratorium on badness. No one picked on my brother, which was probably the light spot of Christmas. I can't express that. There were relatives coming, and everybody, including my parents, were on their best behavior. And there was something nice about that. People being together and no anger expressed. Things sort of passing by, and in that kind of atmosphere, we children probably also didn't misbehave. Everything was available. Many, many laps to sit on, of grandmothers and aunts and friends. And yet, there was some kind of yearning. I heard that some people go to midnight service, some midnight service. And I always felt there should be something more. See, sometimes the snow on Christmas Eve, snow and some light in the houses, that just did something. It touched something. And many years later, when I did sing in a church, as a Unitarian church, there were Christmas services, were candle services, and I was also asked sometimes to sing at other midnight services, but something wasn't there again. There was something that was missing. I don't want to sound judgmental in saying there was a shallowness. Is that a judgmental word? That's what it was. We sang hymns together. Of course, they are marvelous German Christmas songs, giving you the shudders. They still give me the shudders today, when they're not done the way they're played now in supermarkets. On each year a new edition comes out to put these songs into some kind of But the simplicity of the Christmas carols touched me deeply. One thing, going to a church in Leipzig, this is where I grew up, where Bach had done most of his composing and conducting of the musical service, the choir, to go there and hear the boys' choir sing Christmas cantatas or Christmas oratorio. Maybe that was the deepest touch of something that there was a yearning for. To listen to music performed so purely, so without any extra personal interpretation of the performing artist. These were boys. Not great artists who put their personal interpretation or style into something. And of course, the chanting services that we participated in at the center, there was a real arousal of energy, marvelous feelings about this arousal, singing together, chanting together. And still something left untouched. It feels good if you're told that your chanting is directed toward the poor, the suffering, or people who've just been in an earthquake. Or you really feel you're doing something. But in that there is the me. The me that feels guilty, helpless, or powerless, and gets some satisfaction, some reprieve from guilt. I hope I'm not angering anyone with what I'm saying, that we're looking at this together. I'm exploring it. I'm not judging. It was interesting to me. One person said to me that last night, in watching this marvelous sunset that we had, the changing colors of the sky, the changing light, the thought came up, this person told me, that in earlier times I would have raised a thought of gratitude to God for this. But at this moment it seemed so clear that this immediately would separate me from God and God from His creation. And I let go of that thought. There's this famous dialogue between the Chinese emperor and a holy man he heard was coming from India to the shores of China. And he sent messengers to bring this holy man to court. And he asked him, what is the highest, something like this, what is the highest principle of the holy truth? And this so-called holy man said, vast emptiness and nothing holy in it. And when Emperor asked him, well, aren't you a holy man? He said, I don't know. We just recently, a few of us saw a tape in which Krishnamurti was discussing with 3 scientists. And he raised that question whether there is something sacred. Is there something holy? I'm wondering whether as long as the self feels this deep urge to express itself, to express its emotions and feelings, as long as that self is there, yearning to express itself, in its own creations, there's still something lacking. No matter how powerful the feelings, the emotions, and how deeply one feels being touched by the sacred, because it's what we feel, that's what one feels if the shudders go up and down the back. In a church with the acoustics of purely some chant, or madrigal, or motet. The shudders I felt, I've often reported about this, I won't go into it in great detail, in just entering a huge monument outside of Leipzig, which was built as a memory of a war. Huge structure with huge figures inside. Worldly figures, the soldier, the mother, and the farmer or something. Providers for this life. And the guide would intone simple notes, but every note he intoned hovered around that monument hall forever, it seemed. So whatever he intoned would become just a marvelous, harmonious chord with overtones and undertones. And I shuddered as a child, the same shudder as in a church. Or in a chanting service for the dead of a war or an accident. And the belief that one was being touched by the sacred. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not a belief. It's for each one to come to terms with this and find out. But when there is no self, and not just the self inundated with emotion or communal emotion, but no self, no inundation, no drowning it. No self, just the sunset. Which isn't even a sunset. It's everything. Everything and nothing, because nothing is made of it. No one there. To fall back on thought. Just what's there. And no judgment. Quietness within. Just what's there. Then, if one were to talk about it right now, can one say, vast emptiness and everything holy? Whole. We will end here for today.